Taoiseach, the shocking revelations regarding paediatric surgery at Temple Street Children's Hospital have been met with huge anger and disbelief. It's hard to wrap your head around the pain and damage experienced by children and the families affected. 19 vulnerable children harmed, traumatised in what was a catastrophic, unfathomable breach of care and trust. And too many other children still languishing on spinal procedure waiting lists, and their parents left living in fear. Yesterday I met with parents and advocacy groups, and they are very angry. They say that Children's Health Ireland and the HSE have not been upfront with them and are seeking to dodge accountability for the scandal. They say that if the external review is to command their confidence, then there is no way that Children's Health Ireland or the HSE can play any part in drafting terms of reference. They say that if the terms of reference fall short of their needs, they will boycott the review and not allow their children's files to be accessed. And they've expressed deep frustration that this scandal is portrayed as involving one consultant at one site. They say that it is much wider than that. Their experience is one of systemic failure of clinical governance and a deep-rooted failure by the state to properly resource the system, and a failure to prioritise their children for life-saving and life-changing operations. The parents are angry about inadequate operating theatres, a frightening lack of intensive care capacity, angry that their children's doctors are forced to beg for necessary resources. At the weekend, it was reported in the media that far from being in the dark about these experimental surgical techniques, that in fact meetings took place at a very high level and included the head of Children's Health Ireland on these matters. And Taoiseach, this morning I shared with you a letter that came to my possession, and the letter seems to confirm that such meetings were happening as far back as 2020. Suggesting that the head of Children's Health Ireland was involved in these meetings and was even asked by surgeons for guidance on the use of these techniques. This raises very serious questions for Children's Health Ireland, and these questions require urgent answers. Did these meetings happen? What guidance or advice, if any, was given to surgeons and clinicians by the head of Children's Health Ireland? Do you have answers to these questions, Taoiseach? Does Minister Donnelly yet have answers to these questions? These facts need to be established urgently, because this information is fundamental, I believe, to the drafting of any terms of reference. And certainly these issues add weight to the call from parents and advocacy groups that Children's Health Ireland can have no hand, act or part in drafting terms of reference, and certainly cannot be the body to which any of these reviews report back. Tá divna níos mó ann leis an scanal seo, tá ceistena trom cúsacha ann den CHE, agus ní féidir ról bit a bheith acu in nearchtú na dermi tagartha den afreithniu. Taoiseach, I think it falls to you as head of government to ensure that any review is truly independent and holds the full confidence of families and advocacy groups. The letter I refer to raises fundamental questions of fact that need to be answered urgently and directly by Children's Health Ireland. Taoiseach, you can secure these answers, and I urge you to do so. And I also ask you today to guarantee that Children's Health Ireland will not be involved in the drafting of the review terms of reference.
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I think, first of all, I just want to acknowledge once again that this matter is a cause of great anxiety to many patients and to many families attending these services, and I am determined that we will get to the bottom of it. As you know, there is a medical council complaint that is being considered at the moment, and an independent review is being established under the guidance of UK experts, Mr. Salvadorai Nagayam. The terms of reference, as is always the case for any review, will of course be done with consultation with the reviewer, himself, who will of course want to meet the interested parties and advocacy groups and families, of course in consultation with the families and also the advocacy groups as well. They won't just be written by the HSE or CHI, and the review will be independent. But we do need to bear in mind that any review into CHI and the hospitals concerned will only be achievable with the cooperation of the hospitals concerned, and I would expect their full cooperation with the review. Last week, Deputy, I appealed to politicians on all sides, to the media and to the public, not to come to any conclusions about what happened here until we know the facts. And I want to reiterate that now because I read the letter that you sent me this morning. It does put a new complexion on this, as you say. I don't know if it's genuine. I don't know if it was ever actually sent. I don't know if it was received. I don't know if it was acknowledged. And I don't think you know those things either. But it does indicate that there was a level of knowledge at management level about what was happening, that an MDT, a multidisciplinary team involving nurses, doctors, therapists, was consulted. And it also claims, perhaps correctly or incorrectly, that the families and parents involved consented to what were essentially experimental procedures in a very difficult case, patients that weren't fit for any other surgery. So that puts a very different complexion on what we've heard to date, and is very much at variance with the impression created by some of the stories that you and I would have read on the online media. It's exactly why we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We need to come at this from a sensible, level-headed, calm, considered approach, and make sure that nobody jumps to conclusions until we know all the facts. And of course, the review, therefore, has to be thorough and has to be independent.
And Taoiseach, I absolutely agree with you that nobody should jump to conclusions. But what I am asking you to do, and I think this is a necessary precursor to getting the terms of reference for the review right, is simply to establish as a matter of fact whether or not a meeting or meetings did occur involving clinicians, but also the head of Children's Health Ireland, in which these experimental surgical techniques were discussed, whether guidance was sought, and if whether or not it was given. You see, because I think not alone does the establishment of those basic facts, not conclusions, but just basic matters of fact, creates a very different complexion and framework for what the work of the review. So I would urge you to do that. And I have to reiterate again, and I know you're going to meet with advocacy groups and parents and families, the idea that the CHI or the HSE, according to families, would have any hand, act or part in designing the terms of reference, they find that just an intolerable proposition, given the profound failure of their children and given the very big questions that arise. So I'd ask you to address that question again, please.
Thanks, Deputy. I can assure you and the families and the advocacy groups that the HSE and CHI won't be writing the terms of reference for this review, that it will be independent. But of course they'll have to be consulted at some level about what's going to be in the terms of reference. It would be improper not to do so. And absolutely the advocacy groups, the parents will need to be consulted too, and the reviewer who is going to carry out the review. And that will be done. It might take some time, therefore, to come up with terms of reference, because I know the reviewer will want to meet the Minister will want to meet him, and the Minister of Health obviously has political responsibility for this, as do we as a government. And then beyond that, the reviewer is going to want to meet with the advocacy groups as well. So I think it's absolutely right that the terms of reference are done correctly, even if it takes a bit of time for them to be agreed, and that the external review is fully independent.